Hey, SkullKing Nation, you've heard us talk a lot lately about StatRoute.com. I have not seen another stat service come close to what they provide. It's the stat service that we here at SkullKing use for all of our articles and our podcasts. Right now, you can get a free trial by going to StatRoute.com for a couple days to get used to how to work with their search filters. Once your free trial is over, you can use the promo code SkullKingFF to get 25% off your subscription for the rest of the 2018 NFL season. So sign up today and get the fantasy stats that you need to rule your league. Again, go to StatRoute.com, that's StatRoute.com, and use the promo code SkullKingFF, that's SkullKingFF, to get 25% off your 2018 NFL subscription.
Welcome to the SkullKing Football Podcast, presented by Fox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood. I got my brother Justin with me. Go ahead and say hi, Justin.
Hello, everybody. I'm officially no longer O and fill in the number. I'm not 0-5 in one of my work leagues. Thank you, Alvin Kamara, for pooping the bed, I guess you could say. So.
I think it was more of a thank you, thank you, New Orleans Saints offense, for basically running everything through Mark Ingram.
Well, and Drew Brees, and thank you, Traquan Smith, for catching everything so that drives were short, and it was either Ingram or Traquan Smith.
Yes. So just to piggyback off that, what a night, really just the history that we were able to see tonight.
Yes.
In this game. Drew Brees becomes the all-time passing leader. He finished the game now? He has in his career 72,103 pass yards. And let's be honest, at this rate, if you were to say play another 3 years, with the way that they have built this offense, he could still throw for only 3 years, throw for only 3,000 yards a game instead of his usual 4 to 5.
A year.
A year.
A game is great fantasy numbers.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm in a year. 3,000 yards a year instead of the 4 to 5 that he'd been on that stretch. And he'd still finish in 3 years with over 80,000 pass yards.
I'm convinced he does 80, personally. Unless they win the Super Bowl this year and he's like, okay, I'm good. I'm done.
That was it. I'm done.
I have everything I needed. I go out on top in every category imaginable, and I'm done.
The only thing missing tonight was his 500th career touchdown pass. He needed 4. He threw 3.
Which they were definitely trying for, but then the 2-minute warning hit, and then they're like, we're not going to get him hurt. So run up the score against Washington.
So from the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast, not that Drew Brees is ever going to hear this, but
no, he'll hear it. He'll hear it.
Congratulations, Drew Brees! Just the immense amount of working hard to get to where he's at. And I was reading up on him a little bit. An injury is how he became the starting quarterback in high school.
Yes.
Wasn't highly recruited and ended up having to go to Purdue. Wasn't drafted early because he was only, his stats
5'10".
may say 6 foot. He is 5'10".
Yes.
And then, you get into the pros where he was doing pretty good for San Diego.
Yeah, he was doing good.
And on like a not necessary play in the last game of the season, he gets his shoulder all torn up.
Yep.
San Diego releases him. They draft Eli Manning, who doesn't want to play for them, so they trade with the Giants to get Phillip Rivers.
We're dating ourselves with that whole fiasco.
Okay, but this is that year. This is that year.
Yeah.
And Drew Brees ends up the Miami Dolphins, who have now suffered with Ryan Tannehill and Jay Cutler and a whole bunch of other messes over the last 14 years, decide not to sign Drew Brees because they just don't trust his shoulder. And look what he has done with the New Orleans Saints.
I kind of want to do that Kermit the Frog. Yeah, that's none of my business.
None of my business as you sip your tea.
For those of you who watch the YouTube, yeah, go check that out. I just did that with my coffee.
So, all right. Well, again, congratulations to Drew Brees. Just a phenomenal career.
Yes.
And really one of the good guys in the NFL. So,
yes.
All right. So that being said, for the rest of this show, we've got a little bit of the headlines to go through. We've got our Waiver Wire Madness that we'll be going through tonight, and then that'll be it. And we'll let's get this thing going.
Yep.
All right. So for today's headlines.
Today's headlines.
All right. So we'll start here. Marlon Mack with his hamstring did participate in Monday's practice. To be honest, I don't know how much they play him with Nyheim Hines playing the way he is.
If he's healthy, I think they play him because they need to develop some sort of running game. And Hines has been great in the passing game, but really the Colts so far this season have really struggled to run the ball successfully on the ground. So,
yeah.
And I think that's where Mack will prove most valuable in a game this week.
Okay.
If he plays.
Yeah, if he plays, which from what I hear may still not be the case this next weekend.
Yeah, may not be the case.
The Athletics' Michael Lombardi reports that the Dolphins are shopping Devontae Parker. We also, Fong, our running back writer, he did a little research into it. He actually saw someone else deny that report that they are not actually shopping Devontae Parker. So, I mean, we know that he hasn't done a whole lot. So, for right now, he is still not fantasy relevant.
Yeah, it's like we'll get to another bit of news where there are claims that someone is looking to trade for someone, but then it is denied. So it's all smoke and mirrors. It is what the NFL is in terms of kind of the gamification of this. But to me, I think the Dolphins need to keep him. He's been in just on the cusp of breaking out. I think this could have been his year had he not had the injury. Things are kind of in flux. Miami has played horrible the last couple of weeks while he's been in there. I don't think that has anything to do with him, but it's really a full wide receiving core. So it would not shock me if they shop him or if they trade him, but it also would not shock me if they keep him on the roster the rest of the season.
Okay.
I go 50-50.
Texans coach Bill O'Brien expects Lamar Miller to play in Week 6. And while Lamar Miller owners may rejoice, don't forget that Donta Foreman's coming in Week 7.
Yeah, don't rejoice for too long. And we'll talk about that later in the madness.
All right. More bad news for the Jacksonville Jaguars after, knowing about Leonard Fournette and his issues with his hamstring, that he's going to – it's been already been noted that he is going to miss this next Sunday's game against the Cowboys. Corey Grant ends up getting put on the IR because of his Liz Frank fracture or whatever in his foot. Now the Jaguars have announced that tight end Austin Seferian-Jenkins is going on IR. However, ASJ is eligible to return later. Hasn't been that fantasy relevant this year, to be honest.
Yeah, not really involved. They're really doing either 3 wide receivers or they're using them for run blocking. That's basically his involvement this year.
Pretty much. Speaking Monday, Greg Olsen confirmed that he is expected to return for Week 6, but said he expects to require surgery at the end of the season. This makes me really nervous to have him.
He's had to have surgery, I think, at the end of the season every year for the last 2 or 3 years. So if I am a Greg Olsen owner personally, I would look to move him for almost anything I can get at tight end.
Yeah.
Trade him on name value alone.
Speaking Monday. Now, for all of us fantasy owners who have been yelling and screaming about the Packers to run the ball with Aaron Jones, Mike McCarthy in a interview today said that he would love to get Aaron Jones more work, but that, quote, there's more to the position than just running the football. Basically, that means that his pass blocking is what's keeping him off the field.
Coach speak is what I take that as. I think that's more. I think that's more about McCarthy being frustrated after a tough loss to the Lions this last week. I think Aaron Jones is fine. His pass blocking has been okay. I think he may have struggled this last week. I'm going to have to go back and look at the film. But of the three running backs, Aaron Jones is the most talented at being a running back of those three.
So it says on here, someone posted in a chat room that Pro Football Focus actually has Aaron Jones' pass protection score at 100. That's something we're going to have to look up.
Yeah, well, I use Pro Football Focus, and I can confirm that, which is why it's puzzling that Mike McCarthy said it. That's why I said that I think this is more the frustration of the tough loss. If there's anybody to be upset at, it would be Mason Crosby, but he's a all-time kicker, not someone to troll like Twitter has done over the last 24 hours. But I think the Packers are going to be fine.
Yeah, pretty much. We want them to use Aaron Jones more.
Yes, so did everybody else.
We talked a little bit on yesterday's episode about Matt Breida. The belief is that his injury isn't serious, and he has not yet been ruled out for Monday Night Football this next week. So
all of you Alfred Morris owners continue to sit in anxious suspense / anger that your handcuff continues to be just valuable enough to keep him on your bench, but not valuable enough to start.
The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Ed Bouchette suggests Le'Veon Bell and James Conner could be used in a committee when Bell ends his holdout. And all the James Conner owners said, crap.
And all the Lev Bell owners said, crap. That is not a good situation for anyone.
No, it's not. Really, what they should do is they just need to make Le'Veon Bell their slot receiver and run the ball with James Conner.
That would be interesting because Washington has done nothing so far this season.
And Le'Veon Bell, how many times has Le'Veon Bell actually lined up in no wide receiver sets as the slot receiver?
Very often.
So
that's a very off the cuff question. I could have had that stat for you, but
Cardinals signed former Titans and Bears wide receiver Kendall Wright to a one-year contract. That's not going to help out their pass game very much.
Their passing game's garbage.
Coach Pat Shurmur said Monday that Evan Ingram with his MCL has a, quote, shot to play Thursday night against the Eagles. I'm in a 10-team league that someone dropped Evan Ingram 2 weeks ago.
That person's a fool, but I would err on the side of caution of not playing Evan Ingram this week.
Oh, what I would do is I'd continue to play David Njoku, who's gotten a major boost with Baker Mayfield back, and I would just pick him up and let him sit on the, pick up, Evan Ingram and sit on the bench for, a week or two to figure out, if he's going to be healthy.
Yeah, and Njoku's got a solid matchup. I mean, the Chargers did hold Cook to like 4 catches and 40 yards, one of his lower production games, but Njoku should do pretty well against the Chargers.
Yeah. Here we go. Later on, we talked about Breida. Coach Kyle Shanahan actually has later said that Matt Breida will not practice Thursday and is doubtful to play Week 6 against the Packers. So he He's doubtful. He has not been ruled out for Monday Night Football, but he's doubtful at this point.
Yeah.
Back to Le'Veon Bell. I know we covered him so much, but he's in the news a lot. We have no choice.
Yeah.
ESPN's Adam Schefter reports that the Eagles have not pursued a trade for holdout Le'Veon Bell and, quote, have no plans to do so. For those of you who hadn't seen anything or hadn't heard, the Philadelphia Eagles restructured Fletcher Cox's contract to free up $8 million in cap space this year and an extra $11 million in cap space next year.
And for those of you who are not familiar with contract negotiations and those kinds of things, why on earth would you restructure now to free up that amount of space? Not only that, but why would the player do that to free up that space now? I mean, he's going to get his money regardless. He's just going to get it later. But why would a team restructure their money now to not go make a move now?
Yeah, the trading deadline is what, October 30th?
Yeah. Trading deadline's coming up quick.
Yeah, it's in the next few weeks. So we do not have a whole lot of time left. And so I think they're looking to make it, and it may not be Le'Veon Bell. Maybe they're looking to move somewhere with someone else.
Yeah, it may be a different running back, but considering that Ajayi's now out, that Clement has been dealing with injuries, Sproles has been dealing with injuries, Wendell Smallwood, we'll talk about him in just a second, but I believe he's the guy to own. They're going to need more than just Smallwood healthy in the backfield.
Yeah, and again, the reason that we're covering all this because it was pinned to the top. The Eagles have placed running back Jay Ajayi on injured reserve with a torn ACL. They believe that it's just the ACL is the only damage that he has to his knee, and this is not the same ACL that he tore coming out of Boise State.
Yeah, an ACL is an ACL, but to me, at least now he can rest his broken back.
True. So that's why we've been talking about the Eagles and Le'Veon Bell. They're going to have to make some sort of move. Corey Clement can get the job done, and while everyone keeps saying that Wendell Smallwood just isn't that great, you look at his fantasy stats, and his fantasy stats have been great. He's been very efficient scoring points in fantasy. So as long as Wendell Smallwood,
all my talking points here.
You're welcome. as long as even if it's a split backfield between Clement and Smallwood, I think they'll both remain pretty fantasy relevant throughout this.
Yeah.
But really, if they really want to get a big back to pound it, because neither one of those guys are bruisers at all.
No, they want their Blount back.
Yeah, basically. So that is it for the headlines. Now it is time to move into our biggest segment of the week. It's time for some Waiver Wire Madness.
Waiver Wire Madness.
All right, so I'm going to kick it off here in talking about your Week 6 waiver wire acquisitions. Right now, quarterbacks for this week that are going to be on bye are Stafford from the Lions and Drew Brees from the Saints. And so I've got two quarterbacks for you. Both are owned in less than 40% of leagues, so they're widely available. And I'm going to start with Baker Mayfield. He's currently owned in 38.2% of ESPN leagues. Baker just threw for 342 yards against a very tough Baltimore defense. Now, it took Deshaun Watson last year a few weeks to get under his feet, and then he took off. Now, Watson has better legs than Baker, but it takes a few weeks to get under your feet. Now that he is accustomed to the offense and I think a little bit more up to speed with the NFL, he's going to also face a stretch here coming up that is very, very kind to quarterbacks and fantasy points. He faces the Chargers, who had a better than normal game against Derek Carr this last week, but then he has the Buccaneers, Steelers, Chiefs, then Falcons. That is like Murderer's Row of defenses that you can absolutely put points on and destroy. So as buys continue to come up, those are great streaming weeks. If you have, say you have Stafford and Baker Mayfield, this is a week you want to play them. Don't go grab anybody else, because you've got a quarterback that's putting up back-to-back weeks of almost 300 yards. I think it was 295 and then 300 plus. So you've got a quarterback putting up yards, getting consistent points. He's going to turn the ball over. What a great option for the next couple of weeks as we get into more and more buys.
Yeah, I like Baker Mayfield. He's definitely that good streamer option going into these next few weeks, especially as all these bye weeks are coming up. He's off my radar personally. The two leagues that I'm in, the one I'm already have streaming options, basically as my quarterbacks, and in the second one, I've got Andrew Luck, who's finally starting to really get going and lighten it up. So, I'm pretty set for quarterback. But for those who stream quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield's definitely an option for you. So,
yeah, coming in at my number 2 quarterback to grab this week would be Jameis Winston. Currently owned in 12.6% of ESPN leagues. He's widely available. He's coming off of the Week 4 bye, where he's had plenty of time. He had first-team reps, plenty of practice. And he did fairly well against Chicago in the second half, throwing for 145 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. One of them was not his fault. But that was all done in obvious passing situations. They were down by a lot against Chicago. They had to throw to try and get back in the game, and then they just kind of worked on some stuff because they knew they were going to lose. The justification for Winston right now is the same type of justification that was widely used for years in starting Matthew Stafford. Bad defense, no running game to speak of. So if you're going to look at playing Jameis Winston, there is going to be plenty of opportunity for passing yardage production. And this week is a great week to do it because he's going up against Atlanta, who's a great team to stream against, like we mentioned with Baker Mayfield in coming weeks.
And
as Atlanta hit
the way it was Dalton a couple weeks ago.
Exactly. Great streaming option that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was Dalton when they played, or 2 weeks ago. And Atlanta has given up 3 passing touchdowns in each of the last 4 weeks. So on that trend, Jameis Winston should throw for 3 touchdowns this week. So streamable option based off of buys. I like Baker above Jameis, but if you need a player to play this week, I think I may give the nudge to Jameis Winston based off of the defense he's going to be facing.
Yeah, he's another very viable streaming option. He's a guy that I've used in years past, the last couple of years in terms of streaming guys. So I definitely think that he is a viable option for streaming. Personally, for me, there's someone else on that team that I'm going to be looking at, but I'll cover that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that one in just a second. I'm going to move on to our running back situation. And so for me, number 1, and I have this player as the number 1 player to own, as the number 1 waiver wire target for the week, above tight ends, above quarterbacks, above wide receivers, and that's Wendell Smallwood. Currently owned in 7.5% of ESPN leagues. Jay Ajayi is going on injured reserve. Now it's Corey Clement and Wendell Smallwood, and I like Smallwood to take the lead out of this backfield. Clement's been dealing with injuries the last 2 weeks, and his ability to come back from his hamstring issue is still in question for week 6, although he should be practicing this week. Smallwood only got 6 touches this last week, but he turned that into 71 yards and a touchdown. If you're hurting at running back, Wendell Smallwood should be your number 1 priority. But I'm going to preface it with this. I've already told somebody else who was set at running back who would not play or start Wendell Smallwood on any other week at all ever, because he's got people like Kamara and like Kerryon Johnson and some more solid players. Those are running backs that are on buys this week, obviously, but he's got like Hunt. He's got players that are going to be perfectly fine to play above Wendell Smallwood. I told him to hold off because his waiver wire priority should be spent on wide receivers. So he should hold and maintain that number one waiver priority for next week in case of injury. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on Wendell Smallwood? I mean, we did talk about him briefly, but what are your thoughts here?
I like Wendell Smallwood. I understand that there are things outside of the specific stats that tend to be a reason why a guy doesn't get played as much. Why I want to say he was actually inactive for a game or two. They love Corey Clement. Jay Ajayi was their guy. They've had Sproles injured. Sproles hasn't been able to be healthy. And so I think that given the opportunity, Wendell Smallwood can prove to be a very good option, not only for fantasy, but for the Philadelphia Eagles backfield. And I think that, personally, from what I've seen in the tape that I've seen, I think that he should be getting more playing time.
Yeah. And so that's why we focus on Wendell Smallwood. Corey Clement could be an option for you if you're later in the waiver wire and you want to grab somebody who may still have production there. I look at this situation much like last year's situation. Is it the Darren McFadden or Alfred Morris kind of situation with the Cowboys when you had to pick one, or at the beginning of the year? Is it the Breida or once again Alfred Morris situation where you've got to pick two, where you're kind of going off of not a lot of game film and you got to pick one? My preference is Wendell Smallwood, but Corey Clement is fine to grab later. Moving on to my next one, number 2, would be D'Onta Foreman, currently owned in 6.1% of leagues. We talked about him last week. His ownership is going to skyrocket this week as Lamar Miller is still dealing with his chest injury. Like we mentioned before, slated to play this week. And Blue was the starter this last week and did very well this last week, getting tons of production, especially in PPR. D'Onta Foreman proved last year that he was better than Blue, obviously, but was really on the heels of Lamar Miller. Considering Miller's injuries this year and his age getting up there, look for Foreman to get work consistently when he comes back. The Texans have already come out and said that he is ready to go when he comes back and is available the week that he does come back. I would not start him week 7 because it's Jacksonville, but I believe that Foreman can be a second half of the season play that can help you win your leagues. So grab him now because everyone will be talking about him next week.
Already grabbed him in the league in the one league that he was available. I won't say I cost myself the week because there were other things that just happened to happen in my league that cost me, but this is the league where the amount of points scored against me is only 4 less points than the highest scoring player in the league. So that's kind of how my season has gone there, and because of it, I will be 2-3 this week, and very well could end up being 2-4 after next week. I've got D'Onta Foreman. I dropped a kicker and waited until after the first slate of games, the 10 o'clock games, were through 3 quarters before I picked up a kicker from the latter half of the day and dropped someone else.
Yeah, moving on. My last one, we talked about him last week as well. Nyheim Hines, currently owned in 46.9% of ESPN leagues. This is easy. The Colts can't run at all right now, and their defense may be more banged up than the Falcons after so many injuries during the Patriots game. Nyheim Hines is really used in that kind of like a Danny Woodhead role / Austin Eckler / Darren Sproles role, where he's more involved in the passing side of things. And with the Colts needing to pass the ball more and more and more, he'll be more involved. Even with Mac potentially coming back, Mac will practice this week, but if he doesn't get a full practice, he probably will not play by the time it gets around to the game this weekend. But the Colts defense has given up 37 to 38 points over the last 2 weeks. Nyheim Hines has proven himself to be electric in the passing game. Doyle and T.Y. Hilton are still banged up. Their status is still not yet clear for the game this week against the Jets. So Hines is still a valuable add.
Yeah, he was added this last week by my opponent and went off. And so, that was one of the circumstances that happened to happen that cost me this past week. He is definitely the pass-catching back He has put up a lot of points the last couple weeks in PPR because of his usage there. Again, as long as he's able to hold on to the ball, he will keep that role. So,
yeah, that's it for the quarterbacks and the running backs. Ryan, how about you take us into wide receivers and tight ends?
All right, so into the wide receivers and tight ends, we are going to start off. Again, I use the Yahoo numbers. I'm sorry if that's confusing to some of you guys, but I have problems with the ESPN app, and I have problems with just ESPN Fantasy Football in general. So I stick with what I know, and I go with Yahoo. So going with that, we are starting off with Mohamed Sanu. He is 32% owned in Yahoo, and I'm sure he's probably owned less than that in ESPN leagues. If you look at his stats for this year, let me actually pull up the game logs. There we go. That's what I was like. He's actually had a pretty decent season so far. In 5 games, he has had 20 receptions for 257 yards and a couple of touchdowns. A lot of people have kind of moved away from Sanu because of the basically the coming out party that Calvin Ridley has had the last few weeks. However, if you look at Mohamed Sanu, even in that massive game that Calvin Ridley had, Sanu still had 4 catches for 36 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah.
The week. Go ahead.
Sanu is owned in 53% of ESPN leagues.
Okay. Yeah. So if you could provide the numbers, the percentages while the next week in Cincinnati, he goes 6 receptions for 111 yards. And then the week after that, this past week against Pittsburgh, it's 4 for 73 and a touchdown. He is still the number 2. Really, it's between him and Calvin Ridley, it's 2A and 2B.
Well,
really,
and to throw a jab here, Ridley would be based off touchdowns. Ridley would be 1, Sanu would be 2, and Jones would be 3. Because Jones still has yet to find his way to the end zone.
As far as the red zone goes, as far as red zone targets, yes, that's the way it would go. So,
correction, I am in no way saying that Julio Jones is not the best receiver on his team.
Really, with Mohamed Sanu, he is productive. He is a flex play. He is a bye-week fill-in. If you're struggling at wide receiver, if you draft really running back heavy and just your wide receivers haven't worked out, he is a guy that you can plug in and get some production out of in your flex spot, especially in the deeper leagues. So moving on, number 2, now that the bye week is over for him, it's time to start screaming his name again. It's time to own Chris Godwin. He is owned in 38% of Yahoo leagues.
He's owned in 39.7 of ESPN.
Okay. And I happen to be one of those owners in ESPN. So far on the season, the last week against Chicago wasn't great, but let's be honest, no one really was all that great in Chicago for Tampa Bay, except for Deshaun Jackson, who went 5 for 111 or something like that. So
yeah, Deshaun does his big boom kind of catch and run stuff, but not much else.
That was also last week was also the first game without a touchdown for Chris Godwin. Yes. He has had 3, 5, 5, and 2 catches. He's at 15 catches, 193 yards in 4 games. So he's averaging just under 50 yards a game, which will put him right around 800 yards. And that's if he doesn't improve at all. And that's if nothing, if Deshaun Jackson doesn't go out with his normal hamstring injuries that he does every year.
Yeah.
So he is definitely the wide receiver 3. But will easily hop into that number 2 spot once, if Deshaun Jackson goes down. And he showed a lot of chemistry at the end of last season with Jameis Winston when Jameis Winston came back, and both Evans and Jackson were out. So, so he's my number 2. Number 3. We're going deeper again here. This is a deep one. Willie Snead, and we were really high on Willie Snead last year. What we didn't know was that Willie Snead was
really high.
he was the one that was high, and got suspended for like 2 to 3 games last year, and just never got involved in the Saints offense. And so This year, he has, after 5 games, he's again averaging that 5 catches, 50 yards. He only has 1 TD, but again, this is a PPR type of guy. 5 catches and 50 yards, that's 10 points in PPR right there. That's a flex play.
Yeah.
And with the fact that Alex Collins is having trouble holding on to the ball, he is definitely a guy that at this point may get more points than Alex Collins by the end of the year. So, yeah, that's saying a lot.
Yeah.
So, he is definitely a guy that again, if you're struggling at wide receiver, if you drafted really running back heavy, this is the way to go. Is Willie Snead. So, this is a guy that can get you some points in PPR. So, that's it for the wide receivers. Moving on to the tight ends. And we're just going to hop into this one right away. Owned in 31% of leagues, Cameron Brate. We are getting the Cameron Brate train going again. So we did a little bit of research, a little bit of statistical analysis, and here's what we have come up with. Over the last couple seasons, Cameron Brate really would drop off, like completely, midway through the season last year, and then came back. And then the beginning of this year did almost nothing. And there's a correlation there. And no, it's not O.J. Howard. The correlation was Ryan Fitzpatrick, his fellow Harvard alum. I look back at the stats over the last 2+ seasons now. Cameron Brate with Jameis Winston averages per 16 games 50 catches for 667 yards and 8 TDs. That's a top 10 tight end in every single PPR league, period.
Yes.
Hands down.
Easy top 10.
Easy top 10. Without Jameis Winston, with Ryan Fitzpatrick as his quarterback, Cameron Brate over 5 games averaged 1.2 catches for 12 yards. Tell me, Jameis Winston is not a huge improvement for Cameron Brate. Getting into last year, I remember listening to one of the other podcasts. There had actually been an interview that one of our another podcast that we know had done with one of the beat writers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they had said that Winston's favorite target to throw to was not Mike Evans. We have pounded Mike Evans for his inability to run crisp routes, his laziness when it comes to route running. Jameis Winston's favorite target was Cameron Brate because Winston always knew that Brate would be exactly where he needed to be to catch the ball every time.
Especially on third downs.
Especially on third downs. So, again, I cannot blow the Cameron Brate train whistle loud enough, especially right now with O.J. Howard missing for a couple games. Possibly for 3 or 4. Because even with O.J. Howard in there, with Jameis Winston throwing the ball around, last year in 13 games, Brate still finished with, I want to say, 47 catches for about 600 yards and 7 touchdowns.
Yeah.
That's still right on that tight end 10 threshold, that top 10 tight end threshold. So if you haven't heard me say it yet or haven't been paying attention, pick up Cameron Brate.
Yes. Currently owned 16.7% of ESPN leagues.
Oh, my word.
That will skyrocket this week.
That's going to go up in a ton. So, all right, moving on. Back to the tight ends. For my number 2 target, this is more of a because there's no one else. Jeff Swaim of the Dallas Cowboys, he's kind of stepped up a little bit in terms of being kind of the top target at the tight end position for Dak Prescott. But it's still not a whole lot. He said, 3 receptions, 5, 3, 3 on 4, 7, 5, and 3 targets. 14 receptions, 159 yards, only 1 TD. Really, it's more. This is a play to just make sure you get a few points and not get skunked with a 0.
Yeah, one of the things that I'll add to the Jeff Swaim topic is that in looking at his stats here, he's averaged or he has scored 9, 12, and 8 points in PPR leagues. He scored 1 touchdown, but if there is a way to open up the field against the Jacksonville Jaguars, it is using the tight end. Travis Kelce, once again, a much better player, 5 catches for 100 yards this last week. Jeff Swaim could be utilized. Once again, there's not many other pass-catching options that are worth playing in Dallas. So Jeff Swaim could, by the end of the season, maybe their number 1 receiver in terms of target share for their offense.
So yeah, so that's I mean, the only other person that's, really kind of gets that kind of, consistent throws. Well, it's starting to become Ezekiel Elliott, but the only other guy is going to be Cole Beasley.
Yes.
Which, again, he's more of that low-end kind of wide receiver target that PPR bye-week only because he doesn't score touchdowns. So the last guy I'm going to throw out there, C.J. Uzomah from the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, this is more of a he should do all right for you. He's not going to do a whole lot. Dalton tends to trust his tight ends towards the red zone. That was really all of Tyler Eifert's production. A lot of the times was his ability to catch the ball in the red zone. Uzomah over the last few, not a whole lot of targets. 1, 4, 2, 1, 2. But he's getting, a couple of receptions a game. 30 to 40 yards, a touchdown. He's got 1 touchdown. Again, this is a if you really need someone just to make sure you get a couple points.
His efficiency is great because he has 9 catches, but he's only been targeted 10 times.
Yeah.
So that's a 90% catch rate. So when they go to him, you are 90% likely to get some sort of production from him. And you've got great matchups in Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and Tampa Bay coming up for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. So like I said, not a great option. This is if you're desperate, if you've lost, a couple of tight ends to injury. We've had a couple of them already go to IR, and you need someone to fill space. So, yeah, C.J. Uzomah. So that's all I've got for the tight ends. So we have officially finished our Waiver Wire Madness for Week 6. Justin, do you have anything else?
No, that's it for me.
All righty. Well, again, we want to thank you for listening to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. Real quick shout-out again. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Screenshot it and DM us on one of our social media sites, whether that's on Facebook, on Twitter, or Instagram, wherever you can find us. Make sure to DM us a screenshot of that to get your name entered in for the $100 drawing. We would greatly appreciate that. The more people you also tell to sign up and can prove that you told them, you will get your name in the drawing even more. So,
and the more people that are entered in, the more $100 prizes there are to win. So it does help you to get more people involved.
Alrighty. Well, again, we want to thank you for listening to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, my name is Ryan.
This is Justin.
And we'll talk to you guys later.
Have a good one.
Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.